you've come today, which is fantastic. So I know one or two people have joined us, especially because of our topic tonight, which is we're thinking about how we can be involved in supporting and ministering to those in care homes in our parish and perhaps even further afield as well. So I would just pray for us now as we begin, and I'll hand over to Tina. So let's just pray together. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your love and compassion. We thank you that you are the shepherd who cares for his sheep. Thank you that you look upon us with love. And Lord, we thank you for the opportunity of drawing alongside those who are living in nursing and residential homes. Lord, we just thank you for this ministry that many of us have perhaps been involved in or have been thinking about. We do pray that as Tina speaks, you will help us to know your prompting, Lord, and your equipping. We thank you for bringing Tina. Thank you for all her wisdom and experience, and we just pray for her now as she leads us. Lord, would you guide her and help her? And we thank you for this time together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Good evening, everybody. How many of you, is it your first time here? Oh, a few of you. Okay, I better introduce myself then, hadn't I, and explain some of the context. Firstly, I'm really sorry that I was a bit late. Time ran out with me today, and I was trying to print off as many of those as I could, and in the end, it's like, more of those will be later. I was like, no, we've hopefully got a balance. But what I would do, I will send the handout round to Miranda and Elsbeth, and then for people who haven't got it, perhaps you could email it on, or just leave me your email address and I'll email you one directly. So I am just sort of now calming down after a particularly busy day, which I won't go into all the details of because it will bore you. So, who am I? I'm Tina. I run a charity called Embracing Age. It's a Christian charity we've been running for 7 years. And one of the things that we do is get volunteers going into care homes. We started in the borough of Richmond, and before the pandemic, we had about 60 volunteers across all the care homes in the borough. There's 17 care homes in the borough of Richmond. A little bit of my background. Many years ago, I trained as a nurse. I've always loved working with older people, so I went into care of older people when I was nursing. I've worked in a care home as a nurse. Very, very different working in a care home compared to going into a care home as a volunteer. I remember when I started volunteering in a care home, because I do believe in practicing what I preach, and I try and go every week into a local care home. I tried to go yesterday, but they had forgotten to tell me that there's an outbreak of nausea and vomiting, so I had to turn towel and go home. But yeah, when you go into a care home as a volunteer, it's a hugely different experience to when you're nursing. Because as a nurse, you have an agenda, whether that's doing a dressing, getting someone washed and dressed, helping someone feed. When you go as a volunteer, you've no agenda. Oh, it's very scary, you know. So I was really nervous when I first went volunteering into a care home, but it's been a hugely valuable experience of helping me to understand what it's like to be a volunteer going into care homes. So what I want to do today, that's just to give you a little bit of background. I want, first of all, we're going to go into, first of all, the why. Why is it important going into care homes? Some of you who were here for that first one, just around ministry amongst older people, some of it might repeat a little bit, but I think the why is almost the most important thing. Then we're going to look at the context. So we're going to do an overview of the sector. I'm going to look at it from the point of view of staff and also as a resident as well. Then we're going to think a little bit about churches and care homes and the relationship between the two. I've put what can be done while restrictions are still in place. Most of the restrictions, maybe that's the wrong word, many of the restrictions have lifted, but not all of them. And it's very stop-start. So we'll talk about that. And then we might, if we get time, talk about what the aims of ministry, for ministry amongst care home residents. So that's where we're going. That's the trajectory for today. Some of you have got a handout. Some of you are just going to have to look over somebody's shoulder. So first of all then, let's think about the why. I love these verses. Psalm 68, verses 5 to 6. A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. You know, when you're going into care homes, you're going to meet many widows and widowers, but actually a lot more widows than widowers because women tend to live longer than men. You know, they are so close to the heart of God, and I think that's something we really need to grasp. Because sometimes care home residents just get so low down on a church's priority list, you know, but actually, if you look in terms of God's heart, they're the people who are really close to God's heart because he is a defender of widows. You know, you're joining him in his ministry when you come alongside care home residents. So, and another verse, and this is the Message version of it, it's that story where the parable of the sheep and the goats, and Jesus says to the sheep, "Come with me, you know, into my kingdom," to the sheep, and they say this, "Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison or come to you?" Then the king will say, "I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it for me." And I just find that such a powerful verse. And this whole idea of being overlooked and ignored, I just find that such a key phrase of the reality of many care home residents. You know, so many care home residents have no visitors, none whatsoever. You know, they may have elderly relatives who can't come and see them, or they may have not married, they may not have children. The lady I used to visit pre-pandemic, she died during the pandemic, I was her only visitor. She hadn't married, she didn't have any children. She had 2 sisters who were alive and had families, but they didn't live anywhere nearby, and there were some strange family dynamics that were going on as well. So just to think you could be that one person who is someone's only visitor, the one thing they look forward to all week. So, you know, I just think the why is that, you know, it is so close to God's heart, you know, and when we visit someone, if we're doing it for Jesus, it's like we visited him, you know, and I think that is really powerful to think about. You know, you might not feel like that when you're going into a care home environment, but that is the reality. So that's just something around the why, and for me that frames everything else. That is the most important thing. I'm going to bore you now with just a few statistics, but we won't go into them too much. But I just think it's really important that you understand some of the context of the care home sector. So a few statistics then. There are around 10,476 care homes for older people across Great Britain, and then Northern Ireland has 305, and that amounts to nearly 450,000 beds. Did any of you watch, it was quite a few months ago now, that Ed Balls programme of when he went into a care home? It's probably on iPlayer or whichever the equivalent was if you didn't watch it. I really recommend it because it shows the reality of a care home environment. Some other stats then. So the average number of beds per care home is 42.5. Obviously there's no half beds in care homes, but you get some really big care homes and some that are really quite small. There's 5,500 care home providers, but to put it in context, 80% of care homes are owned just by an individual provider, privately owned. There's what they call the Big Five, who own the majority of care homes, and that's HC1, Four Seasons, Barchester, Care UK and Bupa. So they're the big five, and they own a massive amount of care homes, but then a lot are just owned by privately owned individuals. And I just thought it's really important to put this in because care homes often have really bad press, don't they? But actually 72.2% of care homes are rated as good by CQC, and 4.3, which is a low number admittedly, but it's really, really difficult to get outstanding, but 4.3 are rated as outstanding. I think, you know, often all you see in the news about care homes is the bad news, isn't it? You never hear any of the good news stories, but actually they can be really good places for people to live if they're a good care home. I've seen some not so good care homes as well, so I'm not naive, but there are good ones as well. And I remember chatting to a resident once, and I was doing for my research project for my MA, and it was about having volunteers in care homes. And this one lady said to me, she said, I love living here. She said, I think it's the role of volunteers to go out and tell people that care homes are a really good place to live. And I just thought, yeah, good on you. You know, she said, for her, she had been living on her own. She was fearful, she felt unsafe in her own home. So for her, moving into a care home, she came into a community of people, she felt safe, she felt looked after, and it was just a really good move for her and her well-being. So yes, there are some not so good ones out there, but there's also plenty of really good ones. So that just gives you some context of the care home sector. I want to just set the scene as well in terms of staff. So the vacancy rate for care staff in the UK is twice the average for other professions. It's one of the lowest paid occupations. You can get, probably it's true in this area as well, you can get more for walking a dog than you can for looking after some of the oldest and most vulnerable people in our community. Some research said they're facing a shortage of 105,000 workers. I mean, it's massive. And because obviously we're living in an ageing population, we talked about that in the first session, it means there's going to be an increased demand for care services. So they reckon that by 2030 they need another 627,000 care workers. So, you know, we are facing a big potential challenge in the future, you know, that we need to be addressing now in terms of getting workers into care. The sad thing is that there can be a real stigma around being a carer. Almost sometimes people can be embarrassed about it. And it's one thing to work for the NHS, you know, yes, we'll clap you and everything else, but actually social care, there's much more of a stigma around it as a low-paid occupation. And actually, because all you ever see in the press is the bad news, these poor carers, not only are they overworked, underpaid, but also they've got to almost justify themselves, you know, that actually they're not these horrible people abusing everybody that everybody thinks they are. Do you know what I mean? A lot of them are in it because they love older people, they love caring. So I think it's really quite a hard profession to be in, and I don't think staff get necessarily the training they need either. And the ramifications for the shortage of care workers means that often they've got to have agency staff, which costs so much more money. So there's a lack of continuity of care, and in the end that impacts the residents who are living there themselves. Yeah, it's a massive problem, and there's been so many government reports about what's going to happen, but will we ever see change? Well, we'll have to. But that, again, it gives you some context. And I just then finally want to think about it in the context of the care home residents themselves. Research shows that older people in care homes are twice as likely to feel severely lonely compared to older people living in the community. Now, this was pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, during the pandemic, it was even worse. We'll come into all that in a minute. But sometimes people ask me, well, how can people in care homes be lonely? They're surrounded by others. But I would say most of us have probably experienced at some stage in our lives what it feels to be alone in a crowd. You're with a crowd of people and you're not connecting with them emotionally. And sometimes I think that is the worst type of loneliness, because you've got people around you and it almost exacerbates your feeling that you feel on your own. So when I'm telling my volunteers about this, I don't know how many of you went to university. I went to university. When you go to university, you move to a new place. Often it's the first time you've kind of moved somewhere on your own, and you've got to start again. You've got to build new friendships. You've got to get to know new people. You're just with a whole group of people who don't know your life story. You know, you're not known. And but at university, obviously, you've got things like, normal times, Freshers' Week that's thrown in, lots of alcohol, opportunities to get to know your housemates. And actually, if you really don't like the people you're living with, you can always move next year. And probably by Christmas, you know who you're living with the following year. When you move into a care home, it's kind of a similar experience in the sense you're going to a new place. You know, you haven't chosen who you're going to live with. It's not necessarily the case that you're going to have much in common with those people. You've got to start again building those relationships to be known for who you are. But sometimes the problems of older age, things like hearing loss, visual impairment, and things like that, they all impact our ability to communicate, don't they, and to build those meaningful relationships. Plus, on top of that, you've got the fact that 70 to 80% of care home residents have some degree of dementia or significant memory loss. Now, research shows that people living with dementia are much more at risk of loneliness anyway, but also if you are one of that 20 to 30% of people in a care home who hasn't got dementia, and you're surrounded by people who do have dementia, it can be really difficult to build meaningful relationships in that context. And so when you think of all those things, you think, oh yeah, I can see how people in care homes might feel severely lonely. And often, you know, when you move into a care home, there's some sort of psychological adjustment that people must go through that is like, this is going to probably be the last place I will ever live. I mean, let's face it, none of us on our bucket list have got to move into a care home, have we? You know, it's not your goal in life. So you've got this psychological adjustment of, here I am in a place I didn't want to be, and this is likely to be it, you know. Imagine the sort of the emotional process you've got to work through in that, and I'm going to show you a picture in a minute. So, yeah, some of those things, high rates of depression in care homes, and a greater experience of loss as well in a care home environment. And sometimes people say to me, well, what about the staff? You know, they're there, they can build a relationship with people, but the reality is that the care home staff are already run off their feet, having to meet everybody's nursing needs, physical, you know, all those different needs that they've got to meet. And they don't have the time capacity to sit down and just have long one-on-one chats with residents, you know. In fact, a few years ago, one of our volunteers decided she was going to become a carer because she so enjoyed her going into care homes, and she got told off for spending too much time with residents. She was told, you know, you've got this, and this to do. If you don't do these things, someone else is going to have to do it. And, you know, so I'm not saying anything negative about the staff, you know, the reality is that they don't have the time that we as volunteers have to go in and really, especially in the big care homes. Smaller care homes might be a little bit different, but in the big care homes, there's a high turnover of staff. It can be quite difficult. And oh yeah, one thing. So one time I heard this resident say, she was talking again about having volunteers in care homes, and she was saying, I just want to be able to chat to someone who hasn't seen me naked. And I just thought, yeah, it's a different dynamic, isn't it, you know? So I want to show you this picture. You can't see it very well, but this is a painting that a care home resident did. And she was in her 90s, and she had to move into a care home because she was having lots of falls at home and she didn't feel she could manage very well. But she just felt completely isolated, and just all that psychological adjustment I was talking about, she just didn't feel she could do it. And so she painted a picture of herself completely alone on a stormy sea, not knowing where to turn. And I just thought that was so powerful. I said, oh, can I take a photo of that and use that? Because yeah, so we found a volunteer for her, 2 volunteers actually. One was an artist too, because she was frustrated with her lack of desire to, she wanted to get better at painting. So we found an artist, local artist, to help her. And then we found another volunteer who used to take her for walks along the river. And she said it completely transformed her life, because suddenly there was, well, she said, I'm out in the normal world talking to normal people about normal things. Now, that's not to say it's abnormal in a care home, but what she meant was the outside world, the real world, rather than the care home environment. Okay. Oh, is that going to go? Yeah, okay. So I just thought it's worth exploring a little bit as well, the impact of the pandemic in care homes, because I know we're kind of hopefully coming out the other side, but we're still not quite there yet, are we? I don't know about you, but I feel the light is there at the end of the tunnel and it's coming. But I was talking to a care home manager yesterday, and she was saying, yeah, they just feel that, again, they're still having to wear masks in a care home, and actually that has a huge impact on communication. I find when I'm going in, I'm kind of pulling my mask down, trying to talk to people, because it's amazing how many people lip read, you know, and how much masks stifle communication. So just thinking then in terms of the impact that the pandemic has had, and that care homes are still reeling from this, you know, it's not business as normal yet. High death rate in care homes. I mean, 40% of deaths in that first wave were in care homes. It's huge, and they didn't have all the PPE they should have had. Whenever there was an outbreak in a care home, residents were confined to their rooms. They couldn't interact with other residents. Imagine the loneliness of that. And these residents with dementia who just didn't have a clue what was going on, and why did they have to see their loved one through a screen? Why couldn't they touch them, and things like that. There were reduced activities in the care home environment. Obviously, the anxiety of the staff, especially in those early days. We've almost forgotten about it now, but those early days when the price of PPE went through the roof. You know, it was, I was trying to help some of our local care homes get PPE. I had to import it from China. Oh my goodness, so stressful, you know, and the prices were just unbelievable. So these poor care homes, already struggling, then they've got to pay all this money for PPE. This was before the government was giving it to them. And these poor staff who didn't have the PPE worried that A, they're going to pass the virus on to vulnerable people, and then B, that they're going to take the virus home to their families. It was a terrible time, and I think it's taken its toll on care homes. And also there's been a prolonged impact because, you know, probably for most of us now it is business as normal. I don't know about you, but I don't even think about taking a mask out with me anymore. I know some people were more perhaps cautious than others for various reasons, but in care homes, as I say, they're still wearing masks. The staff still have to do lateral flow tests twice a week, so there's still ongoing. And if they have an outbreak, the care home has to close again, and an outbreak counts as, well, I thought it was 3, but I'm sure this care home manager said to me yesterday 2 people testing positive. The whole care home has to close again to visitors. You know, it's just so difficult. Obviously, it's had a huge impact on relatives because they couldn't go and see their loved ones. I mean, that's just been so difficult, especially for people living with dementia, or their loved ones are living with dementia, and their loved ones have just completely deteriorated over the pandemic or died, and it's awful. And then obviously the financial toll of the pandemic, because people didn't want to move into a care home during the pandemic. I mean, can't blame them. The price of all the PPE, and then residents dying means they weren't getting their regular income in. So loads of care homes actually shut down because of financial issues. So that's just, again, it's helping you realise that there's of how care homes are still reeling from all this. So thinking then about the relationship between churches and the pandemic. I think first of all it's important to say that care homes have a duty, it's all within all their CQC requirements, to provide for the spiritual needs of their residents. Now how they do that isn't specified, but there is that duty there. But actually even before the pandemic, I think certainly some of the care homes that I spoke to were finding it really difficult to get churches to come in and run services for residents or do last rites or things like that. And then from the church's point of view, of talking to some vicars, what was happening is they would go to the care home and the care home would be totally unorganised and the residents wouldn't be where they were meant to be, and they'd get about 2 people to the service, and so it's kind of both ways. It wasn't always really working very well. And then obviously you've got the different levels of engagement by residents, you know, especially residents with dementia, perhaps need a slightly different approach to residents who don't have dementia when you're leading a service. And then other people would tell me that they would go into these care homes to run services or pastoral visits to residents, and they'd see so much need, and it's almost like, I don't know where to start, this is so big. And another challenge, which is probably a challenge in every area of church life, is getting the volunteers to go in and be part of those care home services. So I'm recognising there's huge challenges around it, but that's not to say there aren't some solutions. Post-pandemic, well, like I was saying, it seems very stop-start at the moment. The care home, our church goes into 2 care homes, and my husband leads the services in them. And we were due to go, when's the 19th? We haven't missed it yet, have we? No, soon. We were due to go, and they've shut down because they've had 2 or 3 cases of COVID. They went the previous month, the month before it was shut down again because of another 2. So it's this going, oh, we're starting, oh no, we're stopping, stop. And I'm sure that's probably been a lot of people's experience. One of the challenges I didn't mention about the staff, but I don't know if you remember that at one point there was that legislation that staff had to be vaccinated, double vaccinated. That was, well, it's political, I suppose, so I have to be careful what I say, but you know, some wonderful staff lost their jobs because of that, and then it all turned around and now they don't have to be vaccinated. Part of that was also that volunteers had to be vaccinated as well. So we lost some lovely volunteers because for whatever reason they'd chosen not to be double vaccinated as it was then. Obviously that's not helped the crisis in terms of staffing in care homes either. But also I think for some volunteers, there's still a nervousness about going back into those sort of environments because of the risk of COVID, because it's still there, isn't it? Family in my life group have just got it this week. So there's lots of things even post-pandemic that we have to be aware of. And lateral flow tests, staff, as I say, do them twice a week. The care home I volunteer in, I don't have to do a lateral flow test anymore, but one of the care homes we run the services in, they still want everyone to do a lateral flow test. So again, it's patchy, you know, and each care home just interprets the rules differently in terms of how it works for them. So what I want to think about then is how can we, bit defenders coming up. I really don't want you to do an update, no. Okay, how can we then build the relationship with care homes? So I'm going to give you some ideas. Sorry, it's not very focused, is it? But hopefully you can see that a little bit. Now, I will just say, I'll show you these 2. Nearly all the ideas you can't read properly, or is it just me because I haven't got my glasses on? Oh yeah, it's much better when I put my glasses on. Okay, that's fine. Thing is, if I put my glasses on, I can't see all of you properly, so it's difficult. These are available on our website as free downloads, and a lot of the things on there are in here, and it's how to adopt your local care home, and it gives you lots of ideas. And then this one is the Care Home Friends Toolkit. This is about getting volunteers going into care homes, befriending residents, of how you can do that. Again, these are completely free to download on our website. And I've put the link on the bottom of the handout as well. So I just thought, you know, because sometimes I know I've painted a really bad picture, haven't I? That was all the bad news. So we've got all the bad news out of the way. We're going to come to the good news as well, because when things are dark, the light shines so much brighter, doesn't it? And I think what I have found is that the little that we do makes a massive amount of difference. You know, it's humbling, actually. You know, the lady I used to visit would say to me, "Thank you so much for coming to see me. It's so lovely to have someone to talk to." And I think, this is an hour of my week. You know, it's nothing really, is it? And for her, it was the world, you know. So just the things we can do can be such a huge blessing in a care home environment. And I agree the need is big, but you know, piece by piece, isn't it? The little that we do. So we'll just go through some of these then. So thank you gift bags for care staff. Now, we did this at the beginning of the pandemic, in the May of that first wave, when things were pretty rubbish. And we invited all the churches in the borough of Richmond to contribute. And we raised, I think, between £2,000 and £3,000. And we created a gift bag for every member of care home staff in care homes for older people across the borough, and we distributed them all across the borough. And in our gift bags we had hand cream, lip balm, chocolate, because you know chocolate helps, doesn't it, in a crisis, biscuits, a scented candle, and then we printed out a special version of the Footprints poem. And then on the back, it had your churches, your local churches praying for you. And then what we also did, we asked people to handwrite thank you messages. And every bag had a handwritten thank you from someone in the community. And we gave that to all the... Now, obviously, that's massive, large scale. You don't have to do that. And obviously, the pandemic, hopefully, is behind us. But, you know, that's no reason why your local care home, you can't go and say, "Oh, we just think you're doing a great job looking after the older people in our community, and we just want to say thank you. Here's something." You don't have to do a gift bag necessarily for all the staff. You could do a couple of boxes of chocolates or some biscuits, you know. But I mean, if you can make it, and the more special you make it, the better in a way. But imagine how that lifts the spirit of care home staff. People are grateful for what we do. You know, they appreciate all the hard work that we put in, and you can do that as a really good way of building trust with your local care home and taking those first tentative steps. Or if you find that over the course of the pandemic that relationship has kind of just been lost a little bit because of everything that's happening, it's a great way to rebuild it. So that's one thing you can do. On the Isle of Wight, what they've done and are still continuing to do, they create these. One of our coordinator on the Isle of Wight, she loves floristry as a hobby, and so she was getting all the flowers from Tesco's that they didn't sell. She had a team of volunteers, and she was creating these beautiful bouquets and giving them to lots of care homes. So that's ongoing. We're doing that on the Isle of Wight. Again, it's just a way of saying your community cares, your local church cares. Cards of kindness, something we developed over the pandemic, people making handmade cards. Again, you can, if you want a way of engaging your local community as well. I think that's one of the things with getting volunteers, you know, we almost have to make it a bit exciting for them and say, you can make a massive difference in this, you know, and then telling them the stories of the difference it has made, because people think, oh, I want to be a part of that, you know, the whole fear of missing out thing. And they are missing out, to be fair. So cards of kindness, yeah. Get the creative people in your community making cards, and you can do it to specific residents, or you can, it's worth checking with your local care home first. You know, this is something we're thinking of doing with all these, nearly all these things. You don't have to do it for the thank you gift bags, but nearly all things you want to say to your care home, would this be a blessing to you? Because if they've got a school down the road making them 100 cards, they really don't want 100 more from the church, thank you very much. But they may not have anything, you know, so it might be a huge blessing. Or there might be individual residents, like what some care homes, they say, can you not put a resident's name on it, and we'll give it to the resident who most needs it. And what we've found in the care homes where we're still doing it, even though volunteers can go back in now, because it provides a real talking point and a buzz and excitement for the residents, and they talk about and compare cards over meals and things. So that's another one. I'll come back to Tech Connect. Knitted aquariums. If you want a fun project, again, engage your local community. We've done this in the Borough of Richmond. We created 9, I think, aquariums, all knitted, crocheted. I wish I had a photo. Oh well, they're on our website. Have a look. You know, clownfish, octopus, crabs. I think we had whales, all sorts of things, you know, and absolutely colourful. And what do you call it, like seaweedy stuff as well, you know, and you create these marvellous, just really fun aquariums. And often what happens is people then also knit stuff that's too big to go in the actual aquarium. So, but you give that in a separate bag and say, this is for the residents, especially residents with dementia, you know, it's a tactile thing. Has that gone up? It's happened again, it wasn't plugged in properly. Oh well, that's what happened last time my battery ran out. I told you it was rubbish. Anyway, it will come back on in a minute. So knitted aquariums, again, you can get your local community doing it. It doesn't just have to be your church community doing these things. It's a way to engage your wider community and show your wider community some great ways of loving their local care home. So what else have we got? Knitted aquarium, pictures of joy. I might have mentioned these for dementia last time. You know, just wonderful pictures. It's my fault. It's my laptop, yeah. Oh, I hadn't plugged that bit in properly. It'll come back on, but we don't need it for the moment. You saw the thing. So creating lots of lovely pictures that you can take into care homes. And I don't know if this has happened before I spoke to you or after last time, but I was at the care home a few weeks ago. If I told this story, those of you who were here last time will just have to bear with me. But we've created these pictures, things like ducklings and kittens and babies and, you know, all sorts of photos, laminate them. And then, because especially during the pandemic, they could be wiped down between residents. But yeah, I was at the care home the other week and I was in the lounge area. And there's this one particular lady they'd asked me to visit, but every time I go, she's asleep, so I always just talk to other people. Anyway, this time she was awake, and I started showing her these pictures. And first of all, she was just not, she doesn't talk, she wasn't responding at all, and I thought, oh, am I just wasting my time here? I thought, I'm going to persevere. And then she started laughing at some of them. And then I read her some poetry, and there's a Pam Ayres poem that's, I wish I'd looked after my teeth. And she was chuckling away at this. And then this care staff came up to me after and said, what were you doing? She said, we need what you've got, you know. And I just thought, gosh, it's so simple. So I've said, I'll do them a pack of everything. But, you know, so pictures of joy, it's a great way of engaging with people with dementia, and even actually people who haven't got dementia. It's a really good conversation starter, you know, because you might show them a kitten. I tend to have a range of pictures, and then they kind of connect with certain ones. And you say, oh, did you used to have a dog? And then before you know it, you're in lots of conversations. Right, let me just see if I can get this back. Just bear with me. Next time I come, so have you plugged it in? Have you put the lead in properly? And so by the 4th time, I'll get it right, won't I? Last time I hadn't plugged it in at all, and then it just completely died on us. Okay, well, that will keep going. Okay, another thing you can do, again, engaging your community. We have, this is a lady who came to us and said, look, I've seen this need, and can I do it? And can I do it under your umbrella? And we said, yeah. And what she had noticed is she was a carer for her mum, and sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once. That is never a good idea. Right. I've lost Google now. Typical. No. Okay, well, forget it. And she'd noticed that care homes really valued her taking in her mum's clothes. And it seemed like there was a lack of clothes. And what I've realised, I don't know if it's just a pandemic thing. Certainly over the pandemic it was difficult, but it might still be a thing. especially if a resident has gone into a care home in an emergency and there's all issues with power of attorney sometimes, and so this poor resident doesn't have many clothes, and so we've been providing emergency clothing packs for care homes. It's a great project, and what we decided to do, because we've had some really good knitters doing our knitted aquariums, we've been getting knitters to create like shawls and capes, and they are just, you just imagine someone who's perhaps a little bit frail, sitting in bed, and they've got this really snuggly soft shawl, and the care homes have loved them. Again, it's something the community can get involved with and just build a relationship with care homes. And I was at talking to one lady in the resident, this was a few months ago, and she had one of these capes on and she was like really feeling it. I was like, yes. Because you see it in practice, you know, we've been saying these things, then you actually see a resident wearing one and her really sort of doing this with it. It's wonderful. Christmas, you can do outdoor carol singing, perhaps even indoor carol singing now the pandemic is hopefully over. Other things we've done is doing gardening. So you can help a care home. If you've got some good gardeners, it really is about who you've got and what their passions are and engaging that. But creating a sensory garden, amazing for people living with dementia. Oh, amazing, I love gardens, I'm sure you do as well, but particularly for people living with dementia, a sensory garden can be brilliant for, and you can, as a care home, can help that. You can provide plants and things like that. Another care home did, this was during the pandemic, but again, it doesn't have to be, seeds. And they planted the seeds and they went in the care home on the windowsill and they did it as an intergenerational project. So the children got involved and then the children were able to see the plants growing on the windowsills. And it was just a lovely connection between the generations. Talk lots about intergenerational stuff as well, like mother and toddler groups in care homes and things like that. Online services. Another thing to think about is supporting relatives. You know, we often don't think about the relatives of people in care homes. And I remember one of our ambassadors, John Noble, he was a Christian leader in the 70s and his wife went into a care home with dementia, and he just describes that moment of when he left his wife in that care home and how he was so heartbroken. You know, we can come alongside relatives during those difficult times. And then finally, I would say, except you can't see it, Care Home Friends is about volunteers going in, coming alongside residents, because all these other things, they're really good. I'm not knocking them. Some of them are a bit gimmicky because we want to create and build trust with the care homes, and they're really good for that. But in the end, nothing beats face-to-face visits, spending time with an individual, listening to their stories and giving them a hand massage or whatever it is, you know, it's getting volunteers going into the care homes, leading services in care homes. But for me, leading services is only one aspect, you know, that actually they're really important, don't get me wrong, I think it is really important, but there's something beyond that we can do, which is about really coming alongside individual residents. Now, I'm going to try and get this PowerPoint back up. So, yeah, let me do that, because you can talk among yourselves for a few minutes. It might work or it might not. No. Right, let's see.
Can I just say, whilst I've got a moment?
Please do.
The pandemic stopped pets going into care homes. And I took my dog in for many years, and that was very good for them because the dog was friendly for everybody. But that stopped, and then suddenly there was that isolation, and they missed that. The other thing was that I've done karaoke in the care home. If you heard me singing, you wouldn't necessarily laugh, but a lot of the people there are quite aged, and so therefore they like a lot of the old songs and will sing along with them. And you can sing with your backing group or whatever you've got it all on tape or on your iPhone, and then stick a mic in front of them and they can hear their own voice, and that is quite good. The other thing is that many care homes have people who are, shall we say, aren't quiet. they talk continuously, and you hear this in the background, and you hear people who will not sit still, constantly shuffling, and you're trying to speak to somebody adjacent to you, and that is quite a distraction in itself. So not only do you need patience, but you need, shall we say, to be focused as a visitor.
Definitely.
And it's quite hard, but the most serious thing, I think, really, from my point of view, was not being able to take a pet in.
Yeah, pets in care homes. We used to have a volunteer who used to take her dog in. I wouldn't even dream of taking my dog into a care home. Oh my goodness, she's just jump up and bark, and so it's got to be the right sort of dog. But that can be wonderful, you know, because it's that connection with animals can be really lovely. And taking people, this is the thing, when you've got volunteers, that you can take people out for walks and do, I mean, obviously there's some parameters and safety things around it, but you can do that sort of thing, getting people even just outside. And interesting what you're saying, one of the things that frustrates me when I go to the care home and I'm talking to people in the lounge area is they've got the radio on, like really loudly, or the telly, and it's not even something that the residents are interested in, it's more the sort of music the staff are interested in. That winds me up, but I have to be, that's the thing, when you're a volunteer, you have no power, you know, you just have to do your best within a situation, but you can make a difference. So I just thought at this point it would be good to just chat around what your experiences are of going into care homes, how you found it post-pandemic, whether you have a kind of vision for your ministry in care homes, whether it's something that I know in one of our areas, the Churches Together group coordinate, or the pre-pandemic they did, I don't know what's happening post, all the care home visits, and you know, the ways of working with other churches to cover the care home. So any thoughts from your experiences?
From the other, I know it's a mix. We're not going into any care homes, as far as I'm aware. Are there any from your churches? Are you going to any care homes on a regular basis?
So we used to have a service regularly. Deborah was involved in organising that in our we've got two in our village. I've popped in recently and they would love us to go back. So they're really keen that we might restart. So we were doing a monthly service.
Yes, monthly, Sunday afternoons. And depending on who you have in terms of the activities coordinator, at times we have a coffee morning on Wednesday morning, and they would bring some of the residents over that could manage that.
Oh, brilliant.
There was one activities coordinator, and she didn't work Sundays, but she came in and she rounded up all the people she knew wanted to come, because the staff would go and say, "You want to go to the church service?" No, because it was just more work for them.
Yeah. I know, it's frustrating when it's like that, isn't it? And I think perhaps that that's why it's worth investing in building that relationship with the care home and with the staff, because, you know, when you give them a nice goodie bag with lots of chocolates, they might be a bit more, you know, cooperative. No, not cooperative, that's not fair. But do you know what I mean? If you've got a good relationship, then, and it's not just, that church down the road coming in, running a service once a month, but it's, you know, that can be really helpful.
I went to one at St Nicholas Church, Christopher Swift there, and Elizabeth Green there. We used to go into the Bradbury Centre, and we went in there. It's more like quite nursing there as well. And we did some services, and I went along to a few. But I did find it quite difficult. I found it difficult because I wasn't really interacting, I felt, with the residents. It was a service. It was led from the front, and there were some hymns, and then we had the communion, and that's it, everyone goes. And I wasn't quite sure what I was doing there, really. I felt a bit strange. I just wondered what other people did.
We had always had chat afterwards. So it wasn't just a service, it was getting to know them a bit.
Yeah. My husband is amazing because he learns the names of all the I'm rubbish at names, but I try, but I'm just rubbish. But you know, and he'll go, "How are you?" And because he has no background in nursing or anything like that, you know, like he'll be having a full-on conversation, and this is a dementia care home with someone with dementia, and I'm thinking, you know, even talking about she was interested in theology and going to an evening class at St Mary. But, you know, it's just really funny, but the residents love it, you know, because they're being treated in a kind of, normally, you know, and I'm not very good. I tend to go into nursing mode when I'm in those environments, but yeah, there's probably a balance somewhere. I don't think theology at St Mary on a Monday night is for these particular residents with advanced dementia, but no reason why another resident...
Sure, it's for that many of us, really.
No, that's true. Other people up on this side of the room, any experience of going into care homes pre-post-pandemic?
Carol singing.
Me and my family did that once. It was just my grandfather was actually a psychiatric ward in the hospital because he had vascular dementia and he'd been sectioned. And we went in just to see him, but we brought along a keyboard and thought we'd see if the staff would let us sing, and we got to sing, managed to sing in the kind of communal area. And they said that, you know, there were some residents there who never smiled or spoken. People who, you know, didn't speak were singing along, and I mean, it's the only time I've managed to do it. Every time I've been in a church, just telling carols. I had something else I had to do, but it was amazing. We aren't aware, because we'd never met any of these people, the difference that the staff told us.
Yeah.
And that was just us. We happened to be there visiting my grandfather.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Familiar words of music often unlock people's ability to communicate. I don't know at what point you'll need to switch, but at the moment we found to use the old forms of the Lord's Prayer because they on the older hymns.
Yeah, I think so. It's coming at things where people are at, isn't it? So the hymns that they know. So yeah, we do all the, I mean, our church is really into all its modern songs and that, but when we go to the care home, it's all the old classics, like What a Friend We Have in Jesus, you know, the ones that because that's what they enjoy, you know, and so why not? And it's what we've tried to do now is, I say we, that's a royal we, I don't do it, my husband does it. What I'm trying to encourage him to do is keep it as interactive as possible. So there's hopefully always some sort of sensory thing for people. So whether that's something to hold, touch, see, smell, because I just think that's really important as well. And again, you can get crafty people doing stuff if you plan in advance. But that especially with people with dementia, that side of things is really important.
A good relationship with the activities coordinator, and that is key to doing anything, isn't it? Now, speaking of previous experience, quite a long time ago when I was a teacher, and I won't go into details, but you know, taking groups of children in. It's always Christmas, isn't it? Why not other times of the year? It was always Christmas, organising carols singing. Lovely, wonderful thing to do, but there was a lot else going on, and bringing groups of selected elderly residents of different types of care homes and sheltered housing in the Spelsall area, to the school to be entertained there. Again, the entertainment was of variable quality, and to have tea. They loved it, but again, it was just Christmas. And thinking back over it, why did we only do it then? I mean, I don't know if it's possible now in schools, but it was getting that good relationship with the activities coordinator.
Yeah, I agree. John, I used to help Deborah, and the difference between having an activities coordinator is incredible.
Yes,
they encouraged. She would not necessarily get the room prepared, but she would also get the residents prepared.
Yeah.
So rather than going just after they've all gone to sleep after lunch, they're all ready for something to happen.
Yeah.
And it was tremendous, wasn't it? And when she left, for whatever reason, such a marked difference.
Yes, it's changeable what you can offer depending on the availability. They don't always have, there aren't always activity coordinators, or there are gaps.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important to partly focus on building that relationship with the care home staff. That is a big key. And even in all those things, you know, it's, as I say, worth checking with the staff. What would be a blessing to your residents? You know, here's some ideas. Because if you give them a blank sheet of paper, they might not have anything to say. But if you said, oh, we're thinking about this or this, and they can then say, oh, yeah, that would be good, or no, we really don't want that. But it's showing that you're not just coming in, doing something and going. You know, you're there to build a relationship. And I think, you know, something that, sorry, I don't know your name, that struck me when you said about entertainment is, it's wonderful to entertain people, you know, don't get me wrong, that is lovely. But actually, we want to do more than entertain people, you know, we want to come alongside them, you know, and build that relationship with the individuals and journey with them. Yeah, so, I mean, we can entertain them as well. That's a nice thing to do.
Can I ask, you mentioned toddler groups, and I know our local NCT did start up one. I'm not sure where it was because I couldn't go because it was when I was working, one of the days I was working. But do you ever get volunteers who maybe take their preschoolers in, take babies in, and also like it's not as big a problem, obviously, but you know, when you've just had a baby, it can also be very, very lonely. And when you've got small children, is there like, what's the opportunity for, you know, bringing young children along, and is it helpful or is it not worth it? Is it or is it more of an issue? Is it kind of?
I would say, again, you check with the care home, because I've had situations where most care homes love it, you know, most care home residents love it, but you will get the odd care home where I was quite surprised with it, and actually our residents just aren't into kids, you know, or a particular resident or whatever it was, so they said no. But generally, obviously the children can't just run amok, because if a resident trips over one of them or something like that, that wouldn't be good. But generally, the interaction between the generations is wonderful, you know, and we've got a couple, so within the Borough of Richmond, we have an organisation now called Brighter Together. It's run by a lady in our church, and she connects nurseries with care homes, and they do a weekly programme with the nursery school children and the residents, and everybody loves it. So, but obviously that's a bigger thing. But yes, just taking a child in can be wonderful. So definitely encourage that. Yeah. Any other thoughts in terms of the challenges ahead for ministry in your local care homes?
We don't actually have a care home in our parish, which is quite strange, really. But Reg, you would know, there's obviously one in
Well, there's one
Shepherdton.
just round the corner, isn't there?
Round the corner?
Ferry Lane, isn't it?
You mean Whitegate?
Whitegate, yeah.
Well, that's your
That's yours. That's the Leyland Church, but right next door to Leyland.
Place on Leyland Road. We have got a sheltered accommodation on Leyland Road,
Yeah.
just on the side of the bridge.
Yeah.
As you go towards Shepherdton, it's on the right, just before you get to the bridge. There's a small, but it's very, very difficult to get in there, because I know Alison was trying to get in there, and you know, she struggled to get in there. And I think we kind of got a block there, and so it wasn't pursued any further.
It's worth trying again. Some care homes, they will be like that, definitely, but often such a high turnover of managers. You get a new manager in and they're like, yes, please. So it's always worth kind of going back, especially post-pandemic, because everybody's reevaluating everything, aren't they, in a post-pandemic world. So, and you know, perhaps if you haven't got care homes in your parish, this is where it's great if churches join together and you say, okay, well, you know, you've got 2 in your parish and we haven't got any. How can we work together in this? And, you know, and even just beyond the parish as well, you know, with the Baptist church, I don't know what churches you've got in your area, but having a joint strategy that says, how can we look at this together to make sure that every care home in our area, let's not call it a parish because that becomes Anglican, doesn't it? But every care home in our area has at least one church service a month. I mean, really, that's nothing, is it? You imagine, I'm just thinking, when I'm old and grey. I'm fairly grey already. But if ever I go into a care home, the thought of only once a month having that spiritual input is quite sad, you know. So I just think at least once a month, you know. But we have to be realistic as well about people's time. But, you know, is there a way you could have a vision for your area and do it jointly? Because the need is definitely there, you know. And if you build momentum, show people God's heart in it, because I think it's always good to go back to the why. You know, why do we do this? Because God, that's, you know, that is his heart for older people, you know, for the widows and the orphans and those who are overlooked and ignored. And if we keep going back to that, you know, and one thing you can do that I really encourage is just almost a starting point is start praying for your local care homes. Just start praying for them in your prayer meetings. Start praying for them however you do your prayer as a church, you know, because when we start praying for things, that's how God grows our heart, isn't it, for it? And, you know, and God will raise people up to...
During the pandemic, we were live streaming, and we still are, but I tried to persuade the staff to think about who might like. Didn't have to watch it at the time, but it was all up on YouTube, and they could help the residents watch and listen to the hymns and so on. So even if we can't go in every week,
Yeah.
there is something.
Yeah. And in fact, that is a lovely thing now, isn't it? Post-pandemic, that there's so many more opportunities for that. But I don't know about you, but I find, I don't know, when we just, that's all we could do, watch a service. Our church did them all not all of them, mainly pre-recorded. I just felt a bit of a spectator, you know, it just wasn't the same. I mean, I do think it's an opportunity for people in care homes. It's better than nothing. But even better is the doing it in person, and then, yeah, maybe have that as a... Because also when they know the people, if they know the people as well, then there's that connection. Oh, yeah, that's the so-and-so who comes in to us once a month. Yeah.
I don't know whether we do this because I'm kind of new to this, but should we almost see the people in the care homes within our parish as, you know, they can be part of our church. It's not that we go to them, it's that that's just another location where we do services. You know, we have services in the church and in the school and in the care home. You know, we see it like that, and, you know, if they're able, they can be on the electoral roll, they can, you know, whatever, feel like they are part of the church. It's not just that we go in and that's like a separate church. They are a part of.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's the way we do it anyway. But you know, there's probably things we can do to make that the case.
I think that's such a good point.
Your point there, we used to have some of the residents from Whitegates come across the services. But then the times of the services had altered for many reasons. But you were very much reliant on volunteers to go and collect them, to bring them back and then take them back afterwards. So they're lovely ideas. The reason why not, it's getting those volunteers to grow that team of volunteers.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I'm just thinking more of a state of mind, you know, even if it's practically impossible to get them in the same buildings, just from a point of view of, you know, if we listed our services, you know, the service at the care home, and again, you know, we may already be doing this, so we kind of use all this, but yeah, it's just that state of mind that they are part of the ones that come, you know, they can be part of our church rather than just the church and the care home. But yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And the benefit we have is that Whitegates is very, very close to where the church is. Nevertheless, we needed somebody, one of the peoples, to assist in that. But yeah, I'm sure it could be done.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Have you been in a care home?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you been in one where dementia is the
Yes,
main?
yes. So my grandfather, he was in a specialist dementia care home.
Because once anybody's been deemed to have dementia, I don't think you can put them on the electoral roll.
Well, that's why I asked. I don't know whether they're...
Because they can't make judgments and
We
decisions.
had one or two who weren't either okay when they went in, sufficiently okay, or had been on the electoral roll the way round. but they gradually died.
Oh.
So,
Yeah, no, I mean, I kind of was aware that there was probably some kind of limitations,
think,
but, you know,
and
obviously
a
there's some...
dedicated family. I mean, there's one chap who used to get to the service most Sundays because his family were determined that he was coming. You know, they'd go and chivvy up the staff and have him got ready to come.
Yeah. Any...
We found there was a problem with the wheeling people across, and it wasn't far, certainly. It was a very narrow pavement, but the original volunteers cross over. They got bad shoulders, they got bad backs, and the willingness was still there, but the actual physical
Mine was willing, but the body's weak.
well, yes, okay. But what was wonderful was what you said when some of the actual carers would bring across various stories, but we got to know some of the residents very well at the coffee morning, and the carers enjoyed staying. Mind, I remember one of them particularly got into trouble because two of them stayed, and when they went back, one of them was really in trouble because they were threatening on staying out for an hour, you know. But it just hasn't happened again since.
I think some of it is about bringing care homes front and centre again into church life, isn't it? You know, not on this sort of periphery that only certain people, that's their kind of care home ministry, but saying, no, there's different ways you can all get involved. You know, get some of your youngsters making cards, and then because that's going to stir their hearts, you know, so it's looking at ways. That's why we have all these different ideas, because it just brings more people in to, you know, to get involved. And, you know, when you're making a card for someone, you know, you can't help but sort of feel feelings towards them, feel that connection. So any ways that you can bring care home ministry front and centre again, as I say, even just starting to pray, and yeah, get your young people involved. You know, I was hearing a story just earlier today about this project where they got young people going into the care home telling, and the residents would tell them their stories, and then the young people created these videos of the lives of these care home residents, and then they had like this film premiere, and they had afternoon tea at the care home. Relatives were invited, the young people came, and they showed all these videos of residents' lives, and then just the joy and how, and the lady who was saying about it was saying, you know, she was just so surprised how much the young people got out of it as well, and so many things that you can do.
Can I say one other thing?
You may.
In care homes, there are no mirrors.
Really?
Oh, is that right?
Is that a rule, or is that just...
Well, why do you think there are no mirrors? Because when they look in a mirror, they don't see themselves. They don't think they are what they are because there's no reflection they've seen.
Oh.
Because, and the other thing worth saying is that some of us here will end up in a care home as well.
Yes.
And that is quite frightening when I have spent 3 years of visiting care homes before the pandemic hit. And you wonder why people are in there, because some of the most intelligent people, or people with the highest degrees, are often in there in the dementia unit.
But you've used those words, end up in a care home, as if it's a very negative thing. I mean,
I would say that.
I have, you know, one aunt, I've did for some years, she couldn't wait to leave her, well, first of all, her flat, then her sheltered housing. She had various mental conditions, psychotic, not dementia. She just wanted to go into a care home. And the way she manoeuvred the social service, I can't tell you, by not being able to do things, she knew she could do things herself. The tantrums she used to have, and they tried to, anyway, I won't say, and she wanted to go into a care home. And it was a success for her.
Well, yes, my mother wanted to go into a care home, and she selected it, and she selected the bedroom she wanted. But then when she was fed the food, she started a what shall I say, a union against the manager because the food was disgusting, and wanted to show the manager how to cook food because it was terrible. But so I've had the experience of my mother, but I say end up in a care home, and I say that genuinely because my poor wife had to go into a care home 5 years ago on the 5th of February. And what is the biggest thing that hits you is that suddenly you are with somebody and thereafter you know that you're never going to be with that person again.
Mm-hmm.
But I hear what you say, but in practicalities some of it is very, very difficult to achieve. Some of the care homes don't like their routine disturbed.
Yeah, and I agree it is difficult, and I'm not suggesting it's easy, but even in those they're the care homes we need to be in the most in some ways, you know, and you know, who knows what impact we can have. Like the care home that I volunteer in, you know, that's had quite a bad reputation locally, and I just think even that care staff nurse saying to me, what are you doing there? You know, we need that. You know, we can still have an impact. But thank you for sharing of the impact for you, of your wife going in, because that's the sort of thing I'm talking about in terms of how hard it is as a relative when your loved one goes into a care home. And you know, we need to think about how we can come alongside those people as well.
Thing. Do you shop in Tesco's in Sunbury? Any of you?
No.
Well, if you went to Tesco's in Sunbury, you are within 50 yards of an 80-bed care home.
Yes, you're right. Stelford or something.
No,
Is it?
no.
Oh, yes, right, yeah.
But of which 50% is dementia. And the people downstairs, you might say, all wanted to go in, but the people upstairs didn't necessarily want to end up there.
Was everyone in a house?
No, next to Tesco. So what I'm saying is that you have to have the experience of going in there, and if you've never been into a care home, you can come out thinking, oh my, it's an eye-opener.
Yeah, but I've had other experiences as well. One of the volunteers who went into a care home for the first time, and I was chatting to him sometime afterwards, and he said, Tina, he said, I'm not afraid of dementia anymore. He said, because I have, and this was a retired gentleman, and he said, I've seen people with dementia have quality of life in this care home environment. I thought that was very powerful because dementia is one of the most feared illnesses, and that was from his experience of going into a care home. So I would say every care home is different, but yeah, there is massive need.
We've been, say in the past, we've seen various people, and we've got to know some of the residents, and those that we've met have just regaled us with their stories of their past. And it's been lovely. Oh, we hear it again and again, and we hear the same story,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, they're reliving that. But what we found is, just on one particular incident, we used to live next door to an old gentleman who was coming up for his 100th birthday, and because he couldn't look after himself, he went into a care home. But he was as bright as a buck, sharp-witted. But when we went into the care home, he had no responsibilities. He was washed, he was dressed, he was fed, he was cared for, but he had no responsibilities. And with that, he didn't have to think about anything. And we watched that gentleman just slide away. When he plummeted, he didn't. His condition just plummeted. There was no purpose for him. Having said that, that's one incident. It's not to say they're all the same, but it goes back to what we were saying about the activities coordinator. If you've got somebody there who can get people to get their activity, get their minds working.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Just the thoughts of this gentleman saying the thoughts of just going and ending up in a park on an old chair with Bruce Willis on TV or whatever.
Yeah. I just wanted to, just at the end of your handout, there's some resources. I can't remember. I think I put the link to those two on there. I've also put a link to Methodist Homes. If you're running services in care homes, Methodist Homes have got some really good resources these days, and training. So that's on there. And then I've put the link to Anna Chaplaincy as well. They have some interesting ideas. So I just wanted to highlight those resources for you. And I think that's it. So,
Thank you.
yeah, that's that.
Thank you so much, Tina.
It's all right.
I won't get too close for you.
Oh. Are you not
It's
well?
all right, I am negative.
Oh, okay.
But only just. It's just been so delightful to have you here, and you've opened a sort of opened a new area of ministry to some of us, I think, that personally I've never really thought too much about. But you've made it come alive and made it seem very attractive. So thank you very much for coming and sharing with us today. And let's just finish in prayer. In fact, why don't we all say the Lord's Prayer together? Our
Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
And we have one more.
Yes.
On the 19th of July, the date has changed from the 5th, so the 19th, so it's about 5 weeks from now. And that will be on general ministry?
No, that one is on supporting informal carers. So people looking after a loved one at home, as opposed to carers, not care staff, people looking after a loved one at home.
Tremendous, tremendous. Excellent. Thank you, Tina.
You're welcome.